In last week's episode, we talked about One Punch Man and heroism. Let's see what you had to say. Luxin Nocte points out that there is maybe a missing part of the conversation here, which is how Saitama got his powers. And there is some fan theorizing about this. And there's also some confrontation of it in the webcomic, though not the show or the manga. And I cut out a part of the script that explained it that I'm gonna read right now. So what we had before we cut it was that this banal backstory might hide some more epic truth is the source of some theorizing. Is Saitama a god, an alien? The webcomic explains that Saitama broke his limiter, a metaphysical barrier which stops beings from gaining real, ultimate power. That's a joke about ninjas. It's explained that normally becoming a hero requires winning the genetic lottery, talent, and effort, or genetic experimentation. But somehow, Saitama did it with just effort. He just worked really hard. Zombie Man asks, so such strength can be obtained with no compensation whatsoever? And Garou responds, no, a price was paid for it. In exchange for his strength, he became bald. Same Saitama, same. But really, I think that Luxin Nocte's point about this maybe being related to Buddhism is a really, really interesting one and spawned a really great conversation. So if you're looking for something to read, before bedtime, this comment is a great place to start. Similarly, Ninja Boy 333 sort of responds to and distills a lot of the points from the episode and has some really great counterpoints and inspires another really awesome conversation. So this is another one I'm pointing out just to point out. Go read it. It's super interesting. Thank you, Ninja Boy 333. Not Daniel Mendelson, also on the subreddit, talks about how One Punch Man could be seen to relate to the Iliad, and I think this is a really great and really interesting comment, and also sort of brings to mind this long-standing and maybe even inherent intertextuality that whenever we talk about heroes, it seems like it makes sense or should make sense that the idea of hero has this long-standing relationship across all of the literary traditions, spanning from the epics of the classical tradition to manga in 2016. And I think that this is something that's, it struck me as very interesting. Relatedly, on YouTube, Jared Janes starts a really great conversation about what it is that superheroes may be meant to do, and mentions specifically the kind of doom and gloom that exists, that sort of pervades the modern situation. That, there's a lot of stuff out there to not be super thrilled about, and talks about how superheroes can be seen as personifications of all of the problems that exist in the world. And I think that this is really interesting in light of Batman vs. Superman, and in the wake of the Man of Steel, and in the upcoming hullabaloo that will surround Civil War, which is superheroes as problems themselves. And I wonder whether or not that itself can be seen as an extension or a response to this idea that the things that we once looked to as heroes, as solutions to problems, it turns out that they just create their own problems, or there are no solutions, there are no heroes, that everything has this practical effect, and that really in the end everything is just destruction. I think I like the solution as a mangle better, though. It feels nicer. Ginanjar Putu Wijaya talks about how One Punch Man might be seen as a nuisance in his own world, but has actually won a fair amount of praise in this world. And I think that this is really interesting. I think the way that One Punch Man plays off of the idea of the public, and that there is tension between what the public perceives and what is the case, and what we as another public outside the world perceive as being the case, is a really great sort of characteristic of One Punch Man. And I think also to just this is a mild spoiler for the manga, so maybe we'll put a link or an annotation for you to skip it or something. But there's a costume contest where the people who are judging heroes based on their costumes really are personified, they're drawn, they're characterized as piggish and snide and gross. And there are other parts of the audience that are really drawn and characterized as great people who are understanding and who are nice. There's a little boy specifically, and I think that is maybe an acknowledgement of this two publics idea that is shown throughout One Punch Man. But yeah, this comment got me thinking. Katie York talks about the idea of the hero as a figurehead, that maybe what we want is someone to stand or stand in for a group or for a collective action, that this is someone who can present a symbol for a larger scale accomplishment or act of good or something, because it's easier to understand and it's easier to grasp. And I think that there is a lot of truth to this, and I think also complicates the idea of a hero in a really interesting way, because then you get to ask who the hero is really being a hero for in certain situations, and not to just keep going back to Batman vs Superman, but it's a thing that I've been thinking a lot about. You know, I think a lot about Zack Snyder and his relationship to the movie and how he must feel, maybe great, maybe not great, about the critical response to it, and the question of whether or not he is ultimately responsible for a lot of that. That, you know, making movies is hard. There are a lot of people involved. There are a lot of voices. Some of them are very strong and have money attached to them. And so for Zack Snyder to take the brunt of the criticism for a movie that could have been better, let's just say, does that then make him a hero for the group of people who are maybe were steered in that direction by some force that remains in the shadows, to make it sound as nefarious as possible? But I think that this idea of the hero as the figurehead allows the hero to stand in front of a group of people in a bunch of really interesting and different ways. If I had hair, it would be blowing luxuriously in the wind because of how heroic. What I mean to say is thank you. Thank you, that's very nice. Priscilla, I'm gonna level with you. Venture Brothers is the thing that I have wanted to do an episode about since we started making Idea Channel like 4 years ago. It's been 4 years. And every time I sit down to do it, it spirals out into like a 9-episode miniseries. And then I just think, maybe I just need to have like a Venture Brothers channel. And I just haven't done that yet. So the short answer is, no. But God, would that be cool? Yeah. New podcast. Morgan just said I should start a Venture Brothers podcast. I'm gonna think very seriously about this. LeoMajor and a bunch of other people made the comparison between Saitama and Superman, which I think is a really interesting one, and I would love to hear what everybody thinks about this sort of compare-contrast to the Man of Steel. But for me, the main thing that I always go to is, you know, Superman is just such a Boy Scout. He is very, very powerful, nearly indestructible, though, you know, of course, gets himself into all kinds of trouble, you know, rarely meets his match in the way that, you know, Saitama is the same. He rarely sort of meets someone who can challenge him. But I think that Saitama is so just aggressively unchallenged that it erases any potential Boy Scoutness, which I think is there somewhere in Saitama, but he's just so over it in a way that Superman is. Man, he's just loves being Superman in a way that's kind of exhausting, for me at least. Relatedly, Charan Singh talks about Saitama being great because he's kind of just a chill superhero, that he is a superhero who's just, you know, a guy. But he's also a superhero. And I never thought, you know, he is described as a superhero for fun, and I never made the connection to him being just a chill dude, and for whatever reason, this now makes me want to rethink Saitama as kind of a Tom Hanks-like character, just someone who is, you know, rather likable, just a dude who's pretty chill, and you know, maybe this is a role for Tom Hanks at some point. Probably not. That would be bad.